You became a chiropractor because you believed in something. And somewhere along the way, between the skeptics who questioned why you didn't become a real doctor, the insurance system that pays you less than your worth, and the business coaches who hyped you up but never really felt like they fit you, you started to lose connection to that dream that brought you to chiropractic in the first place. The dream got buried in the red tape of a system you were never meant to fit inside of. I'm Dr. Alex, fellow DC, and your host of The Rooted DC. This is where we stop trying to fit someone else's definition of what makes us legitimate and start reclaiming our own identity and worth. Towards the end of my second year of chiropractic school, during one of our breaks in between quarters, I decided to take myself to Hawaii to go visit my older brother and his wife. Difficult problem to have, I know, to have a sibling who lives in Maui. But while I was there, my sister-in-law, towards the end of my trip, she took me to get a facial. And we pulled into this office parking lot, this strip mall of sorts. And in the parking lot was this strange structure that I still don't really know how to describe because it was round. It was like a giant round drum, but it sat like a hut in the middle of the parking lot. And there were some steep stairs going up about 15 feet to this structure. And on it, it said it was a chiropractor's office. I was like, I really have to go see what this is all about. So after our appointment, I took a minute and went in and introduced myself and said, hey, I'm a chiropractic student. I had to see what this setup was about because it's so different and unique. And in the course of about a 20-minute conversation, I got from this chiropractor, and honestly, I don't remember his name, and that's not important, but the short story of what he ended up telling me was, get out now. I wish I'd gone to osteopathic school. And I left at that time, I was very much inundated with being on Chiropractic Island and going to a school where they taught philosophy. And we talked about green books and all of that. And I was like, well, he needs some philosophy. Like he obviously missed something in becoming a chiropractor because that was just so negative and horrible and all of these things. And even though I wrote it off at the time as just being something about him, there was a part of it that scared me a little bit and worried me. And it was the same thing that came up when the very few professors, I'm actually thinking of one from my school where I went, and he's since been forced out of teaching, who actually were honest about what it's like to be part of this profession. Everyone else doesn't talk about it or sweeps it under the rug. I'm talking about the harder parts where you're challenged and you're questioned and you don't really know where your worth comes from and things are really freaking hard in practice. Those are all realities that a lot of us face. And a lot of what we're doing here on this show is talking about how we start to heal some of that because it's not necessarily about us or even us as a profession as a whole. It's largely, I think, this conglomeration of things that our history and our past have put into our current reality and our future if we don't start to do something about this. So I'm Dr. Alex. If we haven't met, I'm a chiropractor. I am someone who has been on my own journey with going to chiropractic school and having a big why of why I wanted to become a chiropractor. It's something that changed my life and my health when I was 20 and led to me getting off of medications and having my whole health transform and inspired me, despite my bachelor's degree in comparative literature, to do the prereqs and in sciences, even though that wasn't where my natural abilities laid. It was more in the arts and art sciences and writing and things of that nature. But I went on the journey of becoming a chiropractor because it changed my life and I wanted to help change the lives of other people and the patients I served. And I ended up in Alaska. That's a story we'll share another time. Started my own practice after having a really bad associateship, another thing that many of us can relate to, and found myself in 5 years having built this 7-figure monstrosity that I honestly didn't love. And that really, when I picked my head up enough to take an honest stock of where I was, and it was in that moment when to the outside world I'd arrived. I just bought a 6,000 square foot building. I had this team of 12. Like it appeared like I had everything going for me. But inside, I felt like part of my soul was dying and that I was trapped by the very thing that I built. And I didn't really know how to get out. And the universe threw some really not awesome things that I had to go through in order to get me to wake up and shift and actually practice the way that I is really congruent with who I am and who I want to be and how I want to serve the world. But that looked like going through an insurance audit that took half of our income overnight and eventually ending up in a bankruptcy after I just couldn't pivot hard enough, fast enough, and all the things to satisfy a bank that was coming after me. So that led to me actually leaving the profession for 3 years and going through this journey of questioning why. Like, why did all of this happen? Why me? Why does chiropractic have to have such a hard time just fighting for our worth and our legitimacy? And that is really what the theme of this season of this show is focused on. I had started this podcast in a previous season that happened earlier this year, 2026, when I'm recording this, that was more geared at health professions in general and the entrepreneurial side of things because we exist inside of this industry that is openly antagonistic to anything that's really truly entrepreneurial. And there's research and things to document that and back that up. And as I have been doing that while simultaneously actually working on a PhD in organizational development and change, I keep coming back to our profession and to this struggle that we have that I'm starting to find language for as I'm going through this PhD process and learning more about and these things like a legitimacy wound and struggling with our worth and a lot of the conflict and battle that our profession has that I know I had just gotten to that point where it was like a part of it. And I originally started down this PhD journey looking at, okay, how can I bring something to the profession, but like just not touch that giant elephant in the room that is all of this crap that we deal with. We have the green books guys and the philosophy based people who are like, we just need more of this. And then we have those who are just really fighting to have a seat at the table in healthcare. And so it's driving things like wanting prescription rights and moving us into a scope of practice that we were never really designed for. And then all of us caught in the middle of that, just trying to figure out how we survive in our day to day life as chiropractors. And how do we stop having to fight so hard to make a living and have success on our own terms, whatever that looks like? And so, really, what I want to do with this show, and this is kind of an introduction to this, because circling back to the guy in Hawaii, after my journey and burning out, and have come back to the profession, I got my license back in 2024 and re-entered practice in a totally different way. But I found that as I went through, even though I had the outward picture of success, I started to understand what the guy in Hawaii was getting at and where some of that advice was coming from. Because to be honest, and I've had this conversation with other chiropractic friends who we love our profession, but as it is right now, I would not want my son to go to chiropractic school. We have this huge disconnect between the value that we want the world to have for us or perceive and the reality of what that is. And there's this disconnect between how we actually get from where we currently are and the things we're experiencing, real world stuff. I went to Life University and we as a group and around the time that I graduated, there's around 400 borrowers defense applications against the school asking for our loans to be dissolved. It's not forgiven, but actually, like, just the slate wiped clean because we feel like we were lied to. And honestly, we were. We have documentation. And I think most schools probably do as well. Life has a large amount of it in just the promises that were made about how much money we were going to make and how great practice was. And it's like, that's true for certain parts of the profession, maybe. And maybe the guys back in the 80s who were the ones who were leading all of that, the Mercedes 80s and all of that jazz. The reality of what practice is like, I think felt like a letdown for a lot of us because I know after 5 years in practice, I was making what was more the average median range for a chiropractor, self-employed or not at the time, and it was significantly way less than what they told us we would be making right out of school and that we'd be able to pay off our loans and all of this stuff. And so there's this disconnect that we have as a profession, and it's driven by this is some of the language that I've started to get in my PhD process where I've decided to take on this problem of how do we actually heal our identity as a profession, and where does our worth really come from? And that's what we're focusing on in this podcast. And these are just my ideas on it. I haven't done the research to totally back up what I'm saying, though I'm pulling pieces together from my own experience and from other sources and places where people have researched worth and identity and professional identity and generational trauma and healing. Because as a profession, we have this stuff. Our people used to go to jail to be chiropractors. Our profession experienced the AMA violating antitrust laws and trying to do away with our profession single-handedly. We've got all this stuff in our background that even though it's shifted and yeah, we won that case in the Supreme Court eventually after like 20 some years. Even though some of that shifted, it's still in our perception and how we experience and approach practice and life. I mean, how many of you have had someone come in and say something about, well, I went to my real doctor, and they don't even think about it. It's just I had a patient do that to me and then immediately be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm not saying that you're not a real doctor." And I'm like, "No, I get it. Like it's we're different. We always have been." And honestly, I sometimes wonder what we're even doing in healthcare because it's created such this dichotomy for us of we were founded as something alternative to Western medicine, and yet we've been fighting for all these years to be accepted by Western medicine and defining our worth and our legitimacy by those things and designing our education and our licensing and our boards and regulations and all of that by being accepted and belonging to the insurance industry. And it's created, honestly, I just want to call it a hot mess, but it's created this environment where we're then going in and trying to figure out how to practice and trying to navigate doing all these things while also not necessarily having the training that we need to really understand business in the first place. And it's a hot mess. And so much of our profession is disillusioned, like the guy in Hawaii. Maybe not quite as extreme, but some of us are. I mean, there's pretty high attrition rates in our profession. And we can get into the age-old arguments of they don't have philosophy or it matters where you went to school or yada 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 or they're not approaching practice right. Whatever it is. I'm rising above those conversations. And I want to bring to the surface the things that we are bearing, those maybe subconscious things that are still running in our wiring as a profession and keeping us stuck. And start to elevate our conversation to how do we actually move forward and create something that is uniquely whole and that honestly I want my kid to go do if that's what he really wants to do with his life. He's 13. So he doesn't really know yet, let's be honest. But the fact that so many of us wouldn't do it again or don't want our kids to go through it because we've just seen this side of the profession that's icky and doesn't feel good and not fun and there's so many problems we don't want anyone else to come into that should be a sign that it's time for something new. And so that's like the bigger purpose of what we're doing here. And my invitation to all of you is I'm talking about this because I can't change it on my own alone. And I for a long time I felt like I needed to have all the answers in order to come start to have these conversations. And then I realized that I'm not going to have all the answers because it's going to take all of us collectively to first start to work on this as individuals, which is something that I've done in the pieces that I will share on my own journey of what this has looked like in practice and the parts where I'm still working. So there's the parts that we do as individuals and then there's how do we come together and use that work and use some of that healing in order to move our whole profession forward in a new way and maybe bring some new voices and new perspectives and new leadership and new. We need something different. So that's really what we're doing here. And what I wanted to challenge you with is to start to look at a lot of my focus in this season is around our worth. Where does our worth come from? Where does your truth come from? And a lot of you, if you have philosophical backgrounds, you're going to go to the 33 principles and innate and the green books. Awesome. Great. Love that. And how much do you really embody that? How much is that really the core of who you are and how that shows up in translation into practice? And what I mean by that is I look at a lot of the things that we do in practice is still driven by the need to prove something to somebody or to be taken seriously, or it's driven out of reaction. and not necessarily out of creation of something or really just meeting the people who see us where they're at. I've been reflecting a lot on our processes and a lot of the things that are taught. I very briefly engaged because I'm a pediatric chiropractor, and I briefly engaged with one of the groups, organizations that's out there that helps people build pediatric practice. And it was like an immediate, nope, I don't, this really isn't fitting with me and where I'm at in my journey of how I practice because it was some of that day 1, day 2, big care plans and packages and a lot of rah-rah hype around that, and I'm not saying that that is bad, wrong. If that fits with you and your value system and how you wanna practice and serve the world and all of that, awesome, great. Yes, there's success there, but for those of us who end up in those organizations or practice management groups or coaching programs where it's like something doesn't quite fit and it doesn't feel right, but then you're like, "Well, this is how somebody else had success and made money, so I guess that's what I'm supposed to do, even though it doesn't feel good to me." Sure, you might have some success down the road, but it's never gonna feel right, and that's where we end up burning out or getting disillusioned or feeling unfulfilled, and then feeling like our soul is slowly being sucked out of our body every day we go to work, and we lose that connection to why we're here in the first place and why we're really doing this, and so I'm clear on what my value system is and how I wanna serve the people in my life and how I wanna approach clinical care, and I've been in practice for almost 15 years, so I have some stuff to back that up and all of that, and I can let go and let it be okay that I can create that on my own without needing someone else's input on all the things that they think I'm doing wrong or that I should do or yada, yada, yada. And so my challenge to you is the thing I want you to sit with is how much of the things that you are doing in your practice is driven by it genuinely serving your patients, it genuinely meeting your personal philosophy with how you provide value to the patients and their practice members, whatever your term is. How does it fit within all of that? And where are you maybe doing things or being driven by reactivity or lack or feeling like you can't do it any other way because this is how everybody says you should do it? Or some place where you're giving your worth and your value away to a perception of either what other people tell you you're supposed to do in order to be successful, or you're trying to prove yourself. And so just to give an example of this, this is feeling too esoteric. Here's my personal thoughts on doing like a day 1, day 2, where depending on where you come from, and a lot of this is how you come at this, right? If we're going to hammer people over the head with education and make them demonstrate to us that they know what a subluxation is before we even adjust them, like, let's just stop with this, and obviously, I'm someone who adjusts on the first visit, so this is something that works for me, and if you are someone who waits till day 1, day 2, day 3, whatever, that is your prerogative. I just want you to get really clear on what's driving you doing that. Is it that you genuinely feel that that is the best way for someone to get the most benefit out of coming into chiropractic care? Or is it that you are too terrified that if you don't hammer them over the head with the educational piece before they even start care, they're not going to get it and they're not going to see the value in what you do and they're going to end up slipping through your fingers and walk out the door? Those are two very different places to come at this from. And so my challenge to you is to look at all of the things you do in your practice and look for those places that even if it's not that obvious, I just want you to ask, like, is this being driven by reactivity, lack, or a need to prove my worth, or a fight to look legitimate to whoever? Or is it genuinely being driven by this serves my values and the value I provide in the world and how I best can serve my patients? And this is a very important part and piece of that. And it's something that I absolutely need to keep because it just fits so well with who I am and what I'm here to do. Very different test to give yourself. And so I'm really curious for all of us. I had this was actually just last night. I had this little rabbit trail of going into just checking out this organization and seeing if it would be a fit. And it was like an immediate no. And I just let that be okay. I didn't try to be like, yeah, but I need this. Or, "Nah, no, like we're all figuring it out, right? And maybe somewhere out there, there's a process that is a fit for me, but I can also trust myself to co-create that. Like, where I got to, I was journaling through it last night, and we can feel like we need someone else's input or we need to learn from the greats. There's the whole thing of, like, fake it till you make it, and then don't reinvent the wheel and blah, 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 all the stuff that we were taught in school. And what I got clear on, and granted, I'm someone who's been in practice for a little while, but as I was journaling through it and just thinking it through it, I'm working through how do I move away from the pay per visit model and what would really serve the families that I see best and have it still be accessible and affordable and yet still provide me an income that feels good for how much I practice like 10 hours a week. So but it feels good for being part time, but also with my expertise and education and I have background in heart math and positive psychology that I bring into my adjustments too. So how does all that come together? And I know I'm not the only one who's struggled with fitting all this together, right? Not even struggle, but just thinking about it and not necessarily fitting into that model of all the modalities and the things that you do need to have a certain price, but just like what's the value of someone coming to see you for what you offer? And the thought that came to my head was one we're gonna come back to again and again, and it's like, "Well, why don't I just ask the people who are seeing me what they need and what can make it better? What would coming into my office, what would make it?" I have a lot of five-star reviews, but what could make it even better for them? And that's scary because it's letting go of our need to be right, be legitimate, prove our worth, to educate them, to have them have to know all this stuff about us that has been misinformed by public perception of us or whatever. It's letting all of that go and just letting them tell me what they need and what they would like to see and what value I provide to them and being willing to sit with that. And if it doesn't match what I want to be doing, then that gives me an opportunity to grow and improve from there, but it's not seeking permission or I mean, this is seeking it from the people you serve, which I think it's a better place to seek it from than the people who came up with a system that worked for them and then are trying to fit you into it. And generally, that doesn't really go well, as most of us have experienced. But it's also allowing yourself to just be enough to receive what they have to say. And so that's where I want to start this conversation of our worth and the legitimacy wound and trap that we have been stuck in, where we've been relegated to being these third rate doctor, or I've heard other people say the redheaded stepchild of Western healthcare or medicine. Like maybe we stop trying to fit into a system that wasn't really designed for us in the first place and start to reconnect to our own passion and why we came here in the first place and how we really want to serve people and let those people that we serve help us to start working through a lot of these questions and things that we tend to turn to the experts or the people outside of us rather than looking within for what really feels congruent to me and can I receive from that place what the people I serve have to say to me. So I think this is enough of a tangent for our first episode. With there is a bit of a arc that will go on this season. I like to do things in seasons, so there'll be 9 to 10 episodes where we're really focused in on our worth. Where does our truth come from? How do we shift where we make decisions from? One of the courses I'm taking is in judgments and judgment and decision making. And a lot of this it ties into that. There's a lot of overlap in a lot of the things I'm doing. I'll also bring you things that I'm learning in my PhD process, and what I'm doing with that is really starting to look at from a different perspective than what we've had, where we have these two sides that are vying to be right. How do we actually elevate a step above that into what we're talking about and how we approach our profession as a whole, where we have some healing of the wounds that we have as a profession that we all unconsciously or totally consciously carry into practice with us and really start to move towards where we have a different experience of being part of this profession and one that we want younger generations to carry on and to become into because it really honestly is as great as so many chiropractors tell us it is and not just because we're ignoring all the stuff that isn't. If you found your way here, I'm glad you're here. I took a leap of faith and stopped being generalized to healthcare in general, and I'm speaking specific to us as chiropractors. And we're going to go deep and we're going to have different conversations. And I am really excited about it. So I hope you are too. Episodes will come out roughly every 10 days. I like to do things on every other week. Subscribe wherever you listen. And if you want more, I also write about this on Substack, and sometimes my writing thoughts are coherent in a different way from how I speak just off the cuff. So you can also find me there at the Practice Beneath the Practice. But I'm really glad you're here. I would love to engage in conversation with any of you listening on what this brings up for you or what seems hard and like a struggle or what shifts in your perspective as we go down this journey. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. If today's episode sparked something for you, spend some time with it. Insight is great, but real change takes action. This show exists because chiropractors deserve more than coping strategies to fit into a system that was never really designed for us. If you're looking for more, you can find me on Substack at The Practice Beneath the Practice, where I share even deeper thoughts on this and more. And if this episode spoke to you, share it with another DC that you care about. Reclaiming our legitimacy and rebuilding our identity is a movement that needs all of us. Until next time, stay rooted and remember, you're not alone.